There we go. Okay, welcome everyone to our December webinar, Community Engagement and Data-Driven Indexing with the Library of Virginia's Free Negro Registers project. So the background here is that I saw this presentation at Best Practices Exchange, where my friends Sonia and Lydia were presenting in the session, same room that I was in, but the session before mine. And I was so impressed that I've been telling people about it ever since, and they've been kind enough to join us and present for one of our virtual webinars. Our presenters today are Sonia Coleman, the Digital Engagement and Social Media Coordinator at the Library of Virginia, and Lydia Newroth, who's the Project Manager of Virginia Untold, also at Library of Virginia. And before we turn the floor over to them, I want to mention that we have another webinar coming up. This is part of a series of webinars that we're still arranging for 2023. But our next webinar is Your First Crowdsourcing Project on January 19th. And you can sign up for the webinars at the link at the bottom of the screen.
We'll drop that into the chat as well.
Right. Is there any more bookkeeping about the webinar? Recordings will be sent out afterwards. Yes. So if anyone who signed up on the webinar, registered for this, we will send out a recording of this. Usually it takes hours to a day or something to get it all processed and uploaded.
Sonia and Lydia, if you have links that you mention in here, if you want to send them to me afterwards, we'll get those in that follow-up email too. So I know you have some. Well, that'd be great.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Sonia and Lydia take over.
Sure, can do. I am going to share my screen with you all. Right, hopefully everybody can see that. Oh, not that one. Sorry, everyone. There we go. Sonia, do you want to give a short intro? Ben kind of covered some of it.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you to Ben and Sarah for hosting these sessions. I think it's really important for us to all talk together and sort of compare notes about these different projects, and we really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you. I see that we have many of our colleagues from other institutions that are signed up for today, as well as some volunteers that we know locally. So it's great to see you all here.
And Ben already gave us some great introductions, but I'm Lydia. I'm going to start us off today, and Sonia is going to also fill in with some various points. But just to remind you all, I'm the project manager for the Virginia Untold project at the Library of Virginia, and Sonia is the digital engagement and social media coordinator at LVA. So I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of the Virginia Untold project. I think that this might be redundant for some of our viewers today, but it is an important foundation for understanding why an indexing project works really well, especially for a digital project that focuses on marginalized history. Data is another way that makes this information more available in different ways. So I think that it's important that I kind of stress that. Virginia Untold is essentially a digital website that provides access to records around enslaved and free Black people in the library's collections pre-1865. It currently focuses on that time frame, recognizing that those records are particularly challenging to find in our archives. The project's been going on since 2013 for a number of years, but we've had some big milestones in the last few years that I think have moved the project forward in some exciting ways. We integrated the work of formerly the Virginia Historical Society, what is now the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. Their project, Unknown No Longer, is now a part of the Virginia Untold database and can be accessed through our website. This project actually predates the Virginia Untold work, so it's nice that that is now all in one place. And then most recently, in February 2020, we received a grant from the National Archives to hire a project manager, with me, to oversee 2 new phases of the work and move the project more into a sustainable phase, I would like to say. The project URL is down at the bottom of the page there. That's how the records can be accessed. And like Sarah said, I can send that out in an email as well, as if you guys would like to check that out. So the NHPRC grant, of course, hires me to focus on two different things. One of those is processing physical documents from the city of Richmond's Hustings Court from about the 1780s to 1860s. So that's a locality within Virginia Untold that was not well kind of covered, I would say, and we really wanted to focus on Richmond City. It's a fascinating place. But I'll be talking today more about our free register project. We are digitizing, we have digitized almost 40 registers of free Black people within the library's collections that represent over, actually now over 17 Virginia localities. These are records that exist here at the library, and I'm going to talk today about their importance and why we need those available on Virginia Untold. Then there's another part of the work that I think is will be highlighted through a couple of our conversations today, and that's outreach and engagement. This is a really fundamental piece of the work that I like to stress. We really can't get very far without knowing what our users are benefiting from and engaging with those that have ancestors in our collections. So that is an important part of the work that I'd really like to see Virginia Untold focus more on in the future. The free Negro registers is what they were historically referred to, but these are the result of a 1793 law that the Virginia legislature enacted that required clerks in the local courts and city courts to record their free people of color. They were asked to record various details like their name, their age, their complexion, their skin complexion, how they were emancipated. Sometimes clerks included information like where they were born or the names of their parents, things as specific as eye color or hair type. So as you can imagine, these register books hold an incredible amount of rich genealogical data that is very useful for those that are researching their family history. So in that regard, they are very valuable documents that we want more accessible to researchers and the public. The registers also match records that we already have in the Virginia Untold database, which is really neat because that's one of the ultimate goals of Virginia Untold, is to tell a fuller story of a person's life by being able to access multiple documents and evidence for who they were. We have a pretty basic understanding of what the registration process looked like. Free people of color were required to come into the courthouse and provide some sort of identification that they were free. And that could be a deed of emancipation that shows that their enslaver did in fact emancipate them. It could be a will in which they were emancipated. It could be a register from a previous locality. That information is included or written down in the courthouse and filed there. And many of those documents, deeds of emancipations, wills, loose registrations, are available through Virginia Untold through many localities. So we've already found instances in which loose registrations match up with some of the names in the register books, and that's exciting for us. The other really valuable point about these register books is that we see them as a launching point for dialogue. They are a demonstration of the Virginia government having increasing fear about a large and growing free Black population. This is one of many measures that's enacted over the late 18th and early 19th century to control Black people in Virginia. And that's an important thing that I think is worth discussing and an important conversation to have about what it was like to be a person of color in antebellum Virginia. You'll also note that sort of a harsh reality that these individuals were objectified by their body type, by their skin color. Having to stand there and have a white clerk pass judgment on what you look like was probably not a comfortable process to go through. And I think that can be a very hard conversation to have, especially for those that may find ancestors in these books. but I also think that it's not something that we should ignore or overlook. So in that regard, these register books are really important to engage with at, I think, a deeper level. And I think Sonia is going to talk a little bit about how we've tried to do that.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. So in my role as the crowdsourced transcription project manager at Library of Virginia, I have worked with the public around the Virginia Untold documents for many years. We've been transcribing them nearly since the project began. As soon as we started scanning them, we were like, hey, we've got to transcribe these things. They are incredible. These open so many doors, not just to people doing their own family research, but also to, again, those deeper conversations that Lydia was talking about. So from the very beginning, Virginia Untold has really captured a lot of public interest. People have really resonated, these documents have really resonated with the public, and they've become very invested in working on this collection, whether or not they have a personal connection to Virginia at that time or not. And shout out to Shelley and Selma, two of our longest volunteers. I think at least one of them is on the call today. Again, we're lucky to have some wonderful volunteers that come to us with a lot of experience. These two are experienced genealogists and researchers in their own right. They bring all that experience that they have to our project and really help us enrich the collections. Slide, please. So again, our audiences come from a lot of different segments of the population, people that you might not necessarily think would be interested in these documents. It's not just your typical, your usual suspects, the genealogists or the history buffs. You can also get some really different audiences brought into working on these transcription projects. Students really learn a lot from engaging with these documents and may bring a different perspective to them. We've also had great luck working with parent and child teams and bringing families into this discussion so that perhaps the child is a little bit more comfortable using the technology, and then the parent may be a bit better at reading the old handwriting. There are just a lot of different combinations of audience members that can let us have those really interesting discussions. And I think it's always important to remember that we still at LVA are learning about this time period and trying to do new research in these collections to better understand, again, what freedom meant at that time. I think that we're all still learning a lot, so it's important to bring humility to these conversations with your volunteers. We've done several events that are specifically transcribe-a-thons for the Virginia Untold collections, and those are always some of our most popular events because, again, this collection really has resonated with the public and people do want to work on it. So every time that we advertise a transcribe-a-thon as a Virginia Untold event, we get a great turnout. And we've had a lot of ongoing engagement, and this has really picked up even since Lydia joined our team. We do the transcribe-a-thons, we do staff trainings to help them understand the project and also help approve those transcriptions. We work with a lot of college classes to transcribe as well. Lydia's done some great exhibits and displays at the library itself. And also social media can help sort of give a peek behind the curtain on what's being processed right now, what's coming up, what's in the pipeline. All of these are ways that we can engage the public and let them know about what's going on with Virginia Untold. And we also really want to facilitate those positive interactions with the Virginia Untold collection because these are difficult documents in the sense that they are difficult perhaps to read for a lot of people. They may require a lot of background knowledge about some of the Virginia laws at the time that Lydia has been wonderful in helping provide for our volunteers. And it just takes a bit of extra care to make sure that people understand these documents and that they can really start to get that deeper engagement that we want to facilitate. We do our transcribe-a-thons twice a month. There's one virtual and one in person, and they're not always Virginia Untold, but again, we get a lot of people on those for those events. This is our most recent Transcribe-iversary, which is our annual celebration of the crowdsourcing projects at LVA. Anytime we can get, 50 people together on a Saturday and just really dork out and go to town transcribing, I think it's a good time. That's a time where we really try to bring in our archivists and our experts and let them talk directly to the crowd. And then we also like to get people's feedback on how different features are working, things that they would like to see improved. And this is just another shot of the Transcribe-iversary in action. It is just a bunch of people sitting in a room looking at their laptops. So that might look a little bit boring, but I promise we have a good time. These four ladies were sitting towards the front of the room when Lydia was presenting about the Virginia Untold project and showing off some improvements that we're going to be making to the website for it. So stay tuned for those. And now just to speak a little bit about the transcription platform itself. We're all here, so you're familiar with FromThePage already. Many of our outside audiences may not have used it before, but if you are familiar, you know that it hosts collections from many different libraries and archives. And that one of the most important features is something that we collaboratively developed with Ben and Sarah through the COSA development grant, which is the spreadsheet feature. That allows us to do more of an indexing approach as opposed to a verbatim transcription. And a lot of different platforms let you transcribe, but not many will do that structured transcription that we wanted to really get to for this collection specifically. So as we helped develop that with COSA and worked with Ben and Sarah, we were able to add the free registers in March of 2022.
Thanks, Sonia. So as we were considering these register books for potential transcription, we realized that they really do lend themselves to an indexing style. What they are form-based documents. They're repeating the same sorts of information again and again about an individual. We didn't need to ask our volunteers to transcribe every word on the page. We needed them to extract these unique data points. And so we decided to set up a field-based spreadsheet in which we would choose the important fields that we thought needed to be captured from these particular documents. And this worked well because we have already actually indexed all of the record types within Virginia Untold. We were now just asking our users to do it for us. We were crowdsourcing the indexing. It also works really well because we are contributing to projects that work with big data. For example, in enslaved.org, we are going to be contributing these CSV files to enslaved.org. You all might be familiar with this project out of Michigan State that actually provides access to projects like this from across the world. So that's exciting for us that this will be another way that we can contribute to that work. It's also nice because we are able to contribute this work to the Virginia Open Data Portal, which is operated by the state of Virginia. Many state agencies actually contribute to this site. It actually became very popular during COVID when people were contributing data sets about COVID outbreaks, and people were then able to access publicly that information and track that. There are other agencies that contribute. We actually fall under sort of the education realm, but I'm actually going to give a quick demo of what it would look like to search something in the Open Data Portal, because what we realized at the Best Practices Exchange is that people are interested in this. And also, I think there's a kind of mystery around where the data goes and what it looks like. Even for me, I feel a little lost in terms of when people throw around this kind of jargon, how it turns out. So you can access this platform by the URL that I just clicked on and will provide. And you can just search actually Virginia Untold in the search bar, and it will pull up all of the indexes for the record types that we have provided through Virginia Untold. So you'll see that there are 19 that are currently available. You can scan through those. I'm going to select actually the free registrations record type because, as I was saying earlier, this is a record type that we already have in Virginia Untold that matches really well with the volumes that we are currently making available and indexing. And the headings in this particular index match very closely to the registered books. So clicking on that link there will take you out to the data explanation page, this landing page here. There's an explanation of what the record type is that we provided. The data about the data set and the columns in the data set give you a breakdown of what each field means, which I think is really useful. That was something we couldn't provide in just giving CSV files or Excel spreadsheets to people. So this is, I think, a useful tool to really understand why and how we pulled this information. And then the table preview, clicking on the View Data tab takes you out to what essentially looks like an Excel spreadsheet. You see where we've captured similar data points like age or physical description, the name, as well as registration number. We call it certificate number here. What's neat about this platform, and actually I'm still exploring all of it myself, are the ways that you can kind of control to find various information. The filter top here will allow you to, for example, if I wanted to find all of the registrations from Chesterfield County, I could control just for that. I think that worked, yes. So it would pull up just the registrations from that particular locality. Of course, you can add more filters. There's also a visualization tab, which I have not spent very much time with because it's just not one of the strengths I currently possess, but I do know that the people that have this skill set utilize this tab a lot. One of the things that have played with is, for an example, if you wanted to perhaps break down by gender, so seeing how many registrations were male versus female, you'll see that many of them don't have a value, which kind of shows you the limitations of data at the time at various times. But exporting here at the top of the page will allow you to export it back as an Excel document. There are a lot of opportunities is kind of what I wanted to convey and get across by taking us out to this site and kind of help us break down this idea of where the data might go and what it looks like. So hopefully that was useful and just seeing where all of this might end up at some point. I also wanted to provide you just with some visual aids of what the registers themselves look like and why an indexing project like this kind of solves a challenge that we've encountered. You see that the image from the left-hand side of the screen from Amelia County actually lends itself to a pretty traditional form of transcription. We could ask our users to just write down everything they see on the page verbatim. But the image from Southampton County is like an Excel doc, and that we would have to ask our users to recreate those columns and rows, and that is just time consuming and it doesn't really serve our purpose as well. We thought about breaking up the registers into two separate collections based on locality, but then you run into the issue of places like Westmoreland, where the clerk in the early 19th century was recording it as paragraph style, and then he or someone else took over and transitioned into a more spreadsheet style document. So it didn't make sense for us to break up the collection within from the page. I don't think that makes a lot of intuitive sense. So again, we just needed to treat these record types as an indexing project rather than in multiple different ways. The URL at the bottom of the page will take you directly to the register collection on FromThePage. We'll send this out as a link afterwards. It was useful to show people the FromThePage platform at the Best Practices Exchange conference. However, I'm not going to take us out today since, again, like Sonia said, we're all here. We know what FromThePage looks like. But I do want to show some screenshots that represent how the registers look within this platform, and just kind of give you the breakdown of the spreadsheet functionality. You'll see that a lot of the columns are free form. People can just enter what they see on the page, but we've tried to control for some things like gender or free status. We've created that as a drop-down menu, and hopefully that will really help when we export our data and we have to kind of make sense of it. I actually realized that I took a screenshot of an old transcription or an old indexing spreadsheet before we had controlled for the date field. And as the result of testing it out with a few of our internal staff or staff here at the library, we realized that we needed to create a form-based structure for the dates. And again, I think that will really help when we come to the export phase. What we've realized is that, you know, in the midst of trying to control for some of these columns, there is still some confusion from our users about what to enter, when to enter it. For height, do we round up? Do you use decimal points? So we've tried to address some of those issues or questions that come up a lot in our instructions page, and we have encouraged people to read this. It's not necessarily comprehensive, but it is the type of thing that we figured users would encounter the most. For example, you know, write age as a numeric value. We need that written in a certain way. We provided a complete transcription if they needed an example to start with. Again, I think it won't be surprising to hear that not everybody reads this page, which we knew would happen. And so actually, kind of organically, we've noticed that users are utilizing the notes and questions sort of option on the FromThePage platform to communicate with us. And this is actually nice. I would prefer that people reach out to us with the question rather than enter something incorrectly. So you'll see that this user noted something that was important from the document, but didn't quite understand that there's a field for that. And so this information, I responded, you know, could go into the who emancipated field. Some users have been using this just on their own, which is fascinating to me, and I'm, again, really appreciating. We might talk about this more at the end, but we will export the notes and keep that for documentation purposes. I didn't provide a screenshot of this example, but some users are actually using this to document things like genealogical information, or if they know more about a person, they have decided to write it in one of these notes field. So just an interesting way of sort of communicating further with our users. And I think Sonia is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in balancing all of these things.
So as Lydia mentioned, just a million little tiny decisions go into creating a crowdsourcing project like this. You have to think about how will users react to this, or what is the actual end use of this data sort of before you begin. And it's hard to grapple with all of those decisions. So these balancing scales are just our way of illustrating some of the factors that we considered while creating this indexing project, and also that we continue to grapple with today. So the first sort of set of variables is the verbatim transcription that our volunteers were so used to doing and that people had really become accustomed to doing, versus indexing and thinking about which one would actually be the most useful for this collection. And again, trying to balance those two things. You'll notice, as Lydia showed you, some of the fields within that spreadsheet are actually spaces where we ask people to write exactly what it says. So even our approach that we've arrived at is a bit of a mix of these two things, where we are standardizing some fields and others you should enter as the original person wrote them down. Another set of things that we wanted to consider was, of course, the user experience, thinking about how easily will our volunteers be able to understand this project and understand what to do, versus the work product itself, and thinking about how useful this will be for us internally as we're working on digital humanities projects, thinking about the future, and things like enslaved.org and the open data portal. So you really have to balance those two. If you make a task too difficult, your volunteers won't do it. But again, you have to think about what will be the most useful in the end. And one thing that we really struggled with, Lydia showed our instructions pages there. It's often tempting just to try to give people instructions for every little thing they might encounter, but that's really not possible in collections like this because they are so varied. Each clerk may have had a different way of doing things that may have changed over time. It's really just impossible to offer those exhaustive instructions as much as we might like to. But we've really had luck sort of letting people learn by doing, and that's one of the things that we're able to facilitate in our transcribe-a-thons. It lets people sort of organically understand the process, start to ask questions that can get at some of these sort of little decisions and details that are difficult to explain off the very top of it, but you want people to be careful as they're entering all of that data. It can cause some frustration to let people learn by doing, but I think that sometimes that can be a good friction in a way. We also found ourselves, and this may be more of an internal thing, that we were thinking a lot about balancing these sort of technical approaches, very data-centric approaches, versus the emotional aspects of this work. I think a lot of us, want the Virginia Untold project to really reflect the deep meaning that these documents have to the descendants, and again, to have those deeper discussions about freedom and enslavement in Virginia. So we try to think about both, and we don't want to ignore either one. And again, we were thinking about data extraction from these documents and how the original process would have been dehumanizing for the free people of color versus what we're doing now and the goals of that indexing project, which is more about helping people connect to their ancestors or analyzing this sort of at scale and how that might be different. So thinking about, again, sort of balancing those technical concerns or technical considerations versus what we hope will be more of the societal impact of this, leading to greater justice and perhaps even reparations down the line. But of course, some of those things are sort of beyond our scope as state employees, but all that we can do is provide this data in the best way possible and encourage people to think deeply about these issues. So some of our lessons that are learned are that volunteers do find it very difficult to switch back and forth between indexing and transcribing. Those are sort of different ways of approaching documents, and sometimes it's very confusing for them. And of course, our volunteers, I'm sure you all have seen this in your projects as well. They are very dedicated. They really want to get it right and help us achieve our project goals. But sometimes they fail to read the instructions, or maybe they don't understand what they mean. So that is always a bit tricky. And we have found that event-based training is really the best way to ensure that we get that high quality work from our volunteers, to help them understand our goals and how this indexing project differs from our more traditional transcription projects. Lydia is also going to be making some wonderful instructional videos. She's already begun on this that can offer an alternative to those events. For people that can't attend or people that need a refresher, the videos I think will be very helpful. And then we also need, sort of ongoing staff training and staff review to make sure that our end product is of high quality, that it's achieving what we want it to achieve in those open data portal and other platforms. So those are some of our lessons so far. This is definitely ongoing. And I think we're ready to sort of shift into the discussion part of today. We would love to hear from other project managers about if these are factors that you currently struggle with or have thought about while you're putting your projects together, and how you may have addressed user expectations versus things that the project demands. Did anyone want to talk a little bit about their projects and if they have similar sort of push-pull factors?
I was impressed, Sonia, with this idea that videos maybe can help balance. I mean, you guys do so much in person, and I think that's amazing, and that gets you really dedicated volunteers who really are comfortable with what they're doing. A lot of people, not a lot, but some people do videos, and that's an interesting alternative to start recommending that more people do, some short videos to help get people over that hump, right? That it's hard to do.
We're curious what kind of feedback you've gotten on that from volunteers. Has anybody said, hey, this helped, or do you not know yet?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I haven't really heard anything yet. I think the rub for us is how we promote those videos. So I did create one recently and just have not shared it through social media yet, which is, I think, one of the main ways that we get contact with people. It's on the it's currently on our YouTube platform. Our website, a new website, is being launched soon, and it is actually featured prominently on the new website. So that's really exciting for us, and I think that we will get some views that way. So we're still ramping up to promoting it and sharing it, but nothing so far.
You could probably put it on the help tab. You're gonna embed it there. We can talk about it as a technical detail. We can talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I know Sarah and I have more questions, but we do want to open this up to anyone else. If you want to just either feel free to type questions in the chat and we'll read them out, or if you want to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question verbally, you're certainly welcome to.
Can I ask my next question then? Nobody else wants to speak up. Does the data portal track how much use these data sets are getting?
Yes, I know that it tracks downloads of the data sets, and some of our Virginia Untold data sets have hundreds of downloads. Lydia may know better about more specifics than that, but I know that we do get some analytics from that site.
Ooh.
I wanted to make a quick follow-up correction to what I just said about the indexing. Selma actually reached out to me personally and told me that she watched the video and it was great. So I just wanted to give a little shout out and thank you for watching it, Selma.
From what Sonia said, Selma probably didn't need to watch it. But
that's correct. Yeah.
Yes. We see a comment from Selma and Amel Face, who is dialed in from France today. Probably it's very late where she is. Sends some compliments. I've got to say, I was so impressed with the balancing act and the description of the challenge of switching from transcription to indexing when I saw your presentation originally. How did you have to update your instructions? I'm thinking about things like ditto marks that you might have, is that an example, or what are the other kinds of practices that you had to ask people to do
differently,
right?
Yes, Lydia and I spent a long time together working on updating our instructions before this collection went live because it is so different. So that in the spreadsheet, each row represents one of the people in the register, and we want to make sure that that row is as complete of data as possible. So as opposed to in our usual verbatim transcription projects where you would just enter ditto or enter straight quotes as the original person had done, in the indexing project, again, we want that row to be as complete as possible. So if someone says, yes, this person is also from Chesterfield County, you want to make sure to put that location in their row. So writing that into the instructions was definitely part of our process. And yeah, just going through sort of point by point and making sure that we had addressed how this is different from transcription. Lydia mentioned, I think, age as being another example where people would write out, about 16 or 17, or they might have fractions in there, and we really wanted to control those and make them, as standardized as possible so that people are entering, they're 17.5 years old or whatever it may be. I think height is another field that we have done that way as well, where again, some clerks were extremely precise in how they measured people, whereas others may have been a bit less so. Lydia, are there any other examples that you can think of?
Not particularly. The situation of writing illegible comes up and is tricky because that's not useful data, but sometimes we really can't tell what the clerk wrote. So we just have to enter illegible and maybe catch it at the review process. So we've been pretty lucky so far that we've been able to identify most of those tricky words and phrases. But an indexing project is obviously different than, I think in verbatim transcription, sometimes we want to try to recreate exactly what the document looks like in terms of writing struck or inserted above, or this is written on the left side of the page. We're trying to create a visual almost for the person that's reading the transcription, and we're not doing that with the indexing project. So that's another kind of thing you have to reorient. I think the user has to kind of remodel their mind around.
I wonder if it's useful also to mention that we wanted to discourage people from making assumptions about any of these people and entering that as data. I think, if you're doing verbatim transcription, you write exactly what it says and you don't have to think about it too much. But if you find yourself sort of transforming that in some way, that almost introduces more possibilities for misinterpretations and mistakes. So we wanted to encourage our volunteers just to follow exactly what is said. I think gender is one of the categories or one of the fields that we were concerned about, because some names may appear to be masculine or feminine to us now that maybe were not at the time. And you just have to be careful to not make assumptions about what's there.
Right.
That leads to so many other questions I have, but again, if anyone else wants to jump in, please do.
Yes, you can ask your
All
question.
right, okay. So Lydia, your demo of the open data portal and its functionalities was really interesting. And it got me thinking about what happens to the data that we transcribe or index from these documents after it kind of goes out into the wild. And I've got a couple of questions about that. One is whether you're aware of usage of this data from the open data portal, but hasn't been ingested by Family Search or Ancestry or things like that. And the other question is whether there's a way for people to get back to the documents from the data, right? If they're looking at a record if even in the open data portal, right, you showed us how you could just type a name of a county and suddenly those records are removed from the context of the document. Is there a way for people to navigate back to the original?
I'm really glad you bring up these questions because they actually surfaced at the Best Practices Exchange Conference. I know it's not a coincidence that we're having this conversation again. So to answer your first question, there have been some inquiries about where the data goes. And I think at the conference, we talked about how we walk the line of kind of facilitating and researching, and we put the data out there and we don't always know or track where it ends up. I think we have some work to do in knowing more about that, to be really honest, because I think it's useful for engagement. Knowing where the data is going and what you're contributing to helps, motivates you further. So actually in the indexing, following the Best Practices Exchange Conference, I sat down and looked at the CSI Dixie project, which we actually worked with. It was several years ago, actually. We had already started our process of indexing. We were indexing coroner's inquisitions, which are investigations into unnatural deaths. And we had processed the ones that included enslaved and free Black people for Virginia Untold. And we had indexed all that information. There was a project out of, I'm going to forget the state, but they were comparing data across Virginia, South Carolina, and Missouri. I want to say that they were in Georgia. It was a Southern project, and they were using coroner's inquisitions to make broad generalizations about the deaths of people of color. And they used our indexes to contribute to this project. And thank you, Sonia, for dropping that in the chat. And so I took a look at it, and you can see where we contributed the work. And I actually added this to the indexing tutorial that I created so that people would have some idea of what data goes towards, right? So, because we had, pulled out how many names and what their gender was, people could now make a large visualization to see that there were this many Black males, that died of drowning in this year from Virginia. So that was actually one of the best outcomes of talking with people at Best Practices was giving people an idea of where the data goes. So I think CSI Dixie isn't a good example. I would, like I said, still like to follow up and understand better about how this work is being accessed and used. To the point about the open data portal, I actually have to go check. I am pretty confident that Jesse, who works in our digital initiatives team, has created a link that takes you back to the Virginia Untold page. And that is kind of, though, the only way that you can get back to it. And I do agree that there's a disconnect a little bit for the user in understanding what they're seeing in a spreadsheet to an actual record. And that's tough for us because, there's all these platforms and there's all this stuff, and how do you tie it all together? I do know that Jesse is working on creating a landing page that will be, I think, a part of our website that will link from our website that will kind of pull all of this together. So it will show some examples of visualizations from Virginia Untold records and talk about that in the context of original documents. Sonia, you can correct me if you know more about how we're contributing to that understanding of the open data portal.
Sure. Yeah, that all sounds correct. And right now, I think one of the issues is that we are migrating our digital repository so that we will, in the old repository system, we were not able to provide stable links because they were all searches within our system. But in the new repository, we will have stable links, permalinks that may make some of this deeper linking to specific documents possible in a way that it was not before.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we have a question on the chat. So Eileen Mosley is with the California State Library, and she says that I found that sometimes the person transcribing a document will write what they think the person was trying to say instead of verbatim transcription. So how do you discourage people from guessing what it should say?
Yeah, that's a bit of a transcription as an art versus a science type of thing where I'm like, sometimes I want you to guess if you can make an educated guess and you know there are only a certain type of counties in Virginia, this is going to be one of these. But if it's something that a guess can be detrimental or incorrect, we want people to be a bit more careful in those circumstances. And some of that is just a judgment call. Again, some of our more experienced volunteers are very good at making this type of judgment call when it's appropriate to, make an assumption that this is in a particular county versus trying to read a last name. And if you need to look for, perhaps other documents to support those decisions. We do have some people, again, that really are great and will look sort of at other documents to confirm a last name or look at census records to confirm a last name. So yeah, it's a bit of again, the balancing act between when is it appropriate to make those assumptions or not.
Yeah, we see that in a lot of the notes and comments section on many projects on From the Page, where you get volunteers who are so dedicated to trying to get it right that they will go off and look up, names and addresses in different places to make sure that they can correlate this one record that they're transcribing to the other facts on the ground, and they'll add them either in that notes section or what some you guys aren't doing this at Library of Virginia, but some of the other spreadsheet transcription projects are adding a notes column to the spreadsheet itself, so that because people have things to say and you need a place to put them, right? And whether that's in the notes and comments, or if you want to, kind of give them a place to put it that's associated with an individual record, that kind of maybe gives them a place to say, I wasn't sure, so I guessed this, or I'm not sure, so I'm not guessing. And that's part of that balancing act as well.
Absolutely. We do have an additional information column, and though originally we had thought of that as being something in the document that does not fit in these fields could go here, people are also welcome to put anything in there that they want to become part of that exported data.
Yeah, I think, and you could always, I guess, when you're exporting it, take that field out before you dump it into a data portal or something too. So
I think we assume there will always be some data cleanup before it goes anywhere else.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Joshua asking if you could explain more or walk through a typical transcribathon.
Ooh, we could have them back and just talk about that for an hour.
Oh yes, that would be amazing.
We could just talk about events for an hour, absolutely, because they are so fun to do. I'll just give you a brief summary here. We typically do our transcribathons as 2-hour events, which I know sounds intense, but actually that time flies right by. We always start each session with an introduction to the Library of Virginia. Many people are not familiar with our institution, even within the state, and we want to make sure, again, that they always know who we are and what we do. After that, we tend to transition into providing a bit of historical information about the collection we're working on, whether that's Virginia Untold or another collection. Sometimes you need a little bit of background and context to help you understand what you're doing. Often we'll share one fun story or one highlight of an individual from those collections just to get people hooked in. Then I'll give a demonstration of the From the Page website so that people understand what they're doing. And I've typically emailed our volunteers before this, had them sign up for an account. Hopefully they've already started poking around a little bit on their own, but we do that demo. And hopefully that irons out a lot of questions. We're showing them how to navigate directly to the Library of Virginia collections on From the Page. We'll open up a document and down to the page level and show them how to start transcribing that. If there are any particular notes about, sometimes we'll have helpful information we want to share with them. I'm thinking of the World War I documents we're also transcribing. There's certain ports that we know that soldiers left from. So we have a Google Doc that's a list of these ports that people may have been traveling through as part of World War I. So sometimes there's some other things like that that we share to help them in this activity. And then we set them loose. And again, you've got to make time for that learning by doing. That is, I think, the best way for a lot of people is we try to get them in and working in a half an hour or so, so that we aren't talking at them too much. And then we let them transcribe for at least an hour. And then we have a wrap-up discussion at the end where, again, we can talk with them about anything that they were surprised by in the collections, things they learned about these time periods or collections that they would not have known otherwise. We try to just have a little bit of reflection built in there at the end. And in that middle period, we're doing a lot of troubleshooting with people, especially in virtual sessions. That can be tricky because everyone's got their own computer, their own setup. We're helping them when they come across those illegible words and other things like that. So that's our typical transcribe-a-thon.
Wow. I do think if we could, I can't obviously commit for Sonia, but I do think it would be worth doing a whole webinar on running transcribe-a-thon events. And I think that would be. So stay tuned for next spring. We only have a few minutes left for a very long question, so I'm going to read it out, and maybe one or the other of you could pick a part of it that you could address. Would you give a general idea how you chose fields to be transcribed? When indexing, how did you choose what data not to record? Did you choose the same data across all the registers?
Yeah, I appreciate this question because it allows us to talk about something that we're working through right now. When we approached the indexing fields, we kind of came at it with capturing as much data as possible, like casting a wide net, essentially, scanning through each of the registers and thinking about what is everything that's being recorded. And that's why you see things like eye color and hair type, because there's like one or two registers that record that, but not all of them do. So it's the same across the board, so that all of our spreadsheets look the same. We've realized, though, that having that many fields might impact user experience. People are kind of getting wary of scrolling across so many columns that are not being used, like the name of the father column or the name of a child. So we've since had to revisit some of our fields, which is a tricky kind of process. So I would encourage you to think very carefully about the types of fields that will be useful to you. It's hard because even some of the content experts just don't know what you're going to encounter in these particular documents. I'll also say that we wanted some of the data to line up with the other record type sort of data that you saw in the open data portal. So we've always chosen to capture the name of an enslaver, the age, when those documents are provided. So it needed to be compatible, essentially. Our indexing forms needed to be compatible with the other record types within Virginia Untold. So that's my quickest answer I can provide. I don't know if Sonia, if you want to jump in quickly.
I think that sounds correct. You did a great job answering.
Wow. Well, thank you both so much. Thanks to the Library of Virginia for coming and presenting and this incredibly important work that you're doing.
And all the thought that you put into how to do it.
Yes. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks again. I think we're going to shut us down because
Yeah.
people don't always get
Yes,
dropped.
that's right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Somebody in from England and somebody from France. Kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Lori.